Alright, good morning. It is early morning here on Wednesday at the front entrance of Holden. The sound of leaf blowers and grass cutters and other the busy bees of Holden are doing their work here to keep this place beautiful, as they do every day. And I'm here to walk again and talk again about what I don't know, but we'll figure it out. What I do know is that it's a beautiful day, like every other day. We've had a string of really nice days. I don't know if I can recall a summer in the past where we've had so many nice days in a row. And by nice, I mean the temperatures are moderate, maybe a little rain, but then it stops, so it's not totally dry. It's not humid. It's sort of the peak of summer, so like everything is great. It gets hotter later in the day. Right now, it probably is in the high 60s. Just perfect. Like perfect temperature, perfect humidity. It feels great. Almost too good to be true. It won't last because everything is impermanent, but for right now, it's very enjoyable. And just being outside, it's just a wonderful thing to be here. You can see all the activity. That's a truck from someone that works here. And it's the love and care it takes to keep a place like this operating is something I've talked about in the past, but I just like to think about it. And when I come here, all the sounds I hear and all the people I see moving around in the carts and everything, it's just a reminder. See over there, there's like a tractor that's mowing grass in the fields, and we'll just walk over here just briefly. And it's the attention. It goes back to, like, we said this, well, I've said this many times, and it's just true, that like paying attention is very closely related to love. Like when you love something, you pay attention to it. When you pay attention to something, there's a certain amount of love, or you wouldn't be paying attention. And I just think this place requires a lot of people, a lot of love to keep it in the shape that it's at. To mow this grass almost every day, I guess. I don't know how often they do, but it always seems mowed. It never seems neglected. They have a team of people that do a wonderful job. And I love, sometimes I meet the people that are doing this and have brief conversations and, express my appreciation for what they're doing and what they've done. And it's just amazing, and it's a beautiful thing to see the harmony of human beings and nature in a place like this. And I always wonder why we can't do this everywhere. Why we can't find a way so that the whole world has the same kind of harmony. Because in other places of the world, endangered species are being destroyed, habitats are being destroyed for animals. I think there was just a recent issue here with the Endangered Species Act. I don't know, there was some executive order that rescinded some part of it, to make it easier to develop on the lands that are protected for these endangered species. And it's just like, if we don't really understand the harmony, this goes back to just not being aware of our relationship with nature and how important it is that we maintain habitats for animals and plants that are part of this planet and deserve to be here as much as we do. When we think human beings are dominant and just that we can destroy this planet and do whatever we want, use up its resources, we're like a virus. I mean, in that sense, humanity is like a virus on the earth that's destroying it. And it's just sad to think about that, because we shouldn't be that way. We should be, you know, like the bacteria that live within our intestinal system. There's a symbiotic relationship. And we have to find that symbiosis, you know, that balance that, you know, we can't just overpopulate the planet, which is another big problem. There just seems to be no end to this human, you know, our human takeover, right, of this planet. I mean, the population is increasing, and, you know, at one point in time we were very few human beings on this planet, you know, and you know, it's natural for a species to want to survive, right? All species wants to survive and thrive, and human beings have figured out how to do that to a large extent. Over all these millennia, we've gone from probably a very small population huddled in little tribes across the planet that faced extinction at one point to become the dominant animal species on this planet, to where we have the ability to destroy it if we're not careful. Like, that's how far we've come. And if you don't see that, like, see that there's a harmony that we have to maintain, things can get out of balance, and then we suffer the consequences. By, you know, the earth suffers the consequences. Everything living on the earth, including us, then suffers the consequences of that lack of understanding. But in a place like this, which is like a haven, you know, sometimes I call it my Garden of Eden, because I don't believe in the story, you know, or I guess I don't know one way or the other whether the story of the Garden of Eden is true. Maybe it's based on, I don't know. I just don't know. But I guess in my head, I imagine it to be something like this. I couldn't imagine it being any better than this. I mean, full of life. Maybe it would have more fruit trees or something. I don't think there's any apple trees here. So no ability to bite the apple and from the tree of knowledge. But everything else is here, just full of life. You know, the geese on the pond, you can hear the geese now. This is Corning Lake. I call it a pond, but they like to make a good point that based on its volume, it's technically a lake. Small lake, though, I would say. Beautiful, though. I mean, how is this not like one of the most beautiful places in the world? I use that word all the time. I overuse the word beauty, but it's not the word that matters. There's a monarch butterfly going on. I don't know, that's not milkweed, but look at that. I don't know if you can see the monarch butterfly spreading its wings, which is very cool. I'm gonna try to see it here. I don't know if it's coming through, but it's like it landed just to show off how beautiful it is. And there's that word again. I mean, look at the diversity of the plant life that just lives around Corning Lake here. There's another black butterfly. Flew right by me. The diversity of life here, plant and animal. But at the edge of the lake, there's always, I like this unmowed, unkempt, but very appealing mixture of native plants and wildflowers. And see, that's milkweed there, the tall plant, which is, I believe, the only food of the monarch butterfly. The only thing that it can survive on. It can't survive on any other plant. So I always like to look for the caterpillars that make their, what is it called, the chrysalis? I'm not getting that right. That, you know, they eat the leaves and then eventually they become a butterfly on that plant. And last year I was watching one for a long time that was crawling around on the plant eating the leaves, and I would come every day and I would say, oh, here's, I think, or is that a bee? No, that's a bee. Sometimes you can catch the caterpillars for the monarch butterfly on there chewing away at the leaves. This must be a paradise for them. I mean, there's no doubt they have an infinite food, nearly infinite food supply here. So this is definitely a haven in Ohio. Whether it's the Garden of Eden, I don't know. But it is a haven. Plants, insects, and when the day is beautiful like this, for humans as well, and you get to come here and just see all this and just say, oh my gosh, how fortunate to be to live in an area like this with all of this, all of these natural wonders. Trying to avoid using the word beauty again, but that's what just keeps coming to mind, which is why a word doesn't mean much, right? Because I can just keep using that word over and over again, but for different things it doesn't mean anything. But the meaning behind that word, like, what does that mean here? You know, it's like just seeing everything harmoniously connected. It's very cool. There's a prickly looking plant. Morning. So yeah, I mean, you could just, I get fascinated by looking at all the plants, and then I just realize, like, the closer I look, the more I see. And I guess if I don't move, I'll just look and pay attention, which is what we need to do. But I guess at this moment we're exploring, so and look at all the same sort of mixture and combination of flowers down there. Everything is very well laid out here, and a lot of thought, like I said, and attention and love and care has gone in to make this place what it is, and to maintain it, and to make new things. You know, I was reminded yesterday that there's new trails that they have that I need to be going on, by the way. Well, I guess, I don't know if we have time, maybe I can cross the street. There's a new set of trails across the street in the working woods that they didn't have before, that they have now, that crisscross through the working woods. No, I don't have my insect lotion on. I probably would need that if we were going to go in the woods. So we might stick around here or just cross the street and go look and see. But every day there's something new. Like yesterday I learned a little more about this place from, you know, people that actually work here, like, that are in charge of all this. And, you know, it just reminds me of the faces behind all this. Sometimes I don't know, and then sometimes I know, and, you know, express my appreciation at what they do, which I think is like the greatest work, to keep a place like this where it's at and make improvements, right? To always be thinking about, like, how do we make this better? How do we add new trails? How do we always keeping in mind the animals and the plants and the harmony, right? A lot of people here are arborists or are inclined in that direction, and this is an arboretum. You're going to have arborists at an arboretum. And always, you know, it's like if we just put that same kind of thought, that same kind of, like, understanding into not just this place, but everywhere. Always being concerned about the plants and animals, and when decisions are made about development, you know, just like they do here, once they put a trail in, they're not going to destroy the habitat of animals by doing that. They're going to find a way, through their knowledge of the animals and plants and what's a right way to do it, to make changes that are beneficial to humans and also, you know, not destructive to the natural habitat. There's a way to do it that maintains that balance, and the people that work here understand that, especially the people that direct what's happening here have to have that deep knowledge of the effect of their actions on a place like this, and make sure that every move they make is not going to cause harm, you know, excessive harm. I mean, there's always a little bit of harm, right, in, say, putting a path through the woods. You have to level the ground, and you have to clear a path, and so whatever was there before is being destroyed, but you're doing it in such a way that you're minimizing the harm to what's there. And I think that's the way we have to look at life too, the middle way, you know, which is a balance between things. And sometimes it's not so easy to find that balance or articulate that balance, but when you have intelligence that comes from paying attention, not human cunning intelligence, but this intelligence that I talk about all the time, which is cosmic intelligence, if you want to call it that, but it doesn't have to be, we don't have to use strange words for it. It's the intelligence that arises or is there when one pays attention. And the more one pays attention, you know, the intelligence emerges, awakens. You know, there's an awakening of intelligence. You can say that's there, maybe sleeping, you know, but not absent, and not arising anew. The intelligence is there already. It's just whether we see it or not. When we see the order of the universe, that order is the intelligence. You know, the harmony is the intelligence. Seeing how life requires harmony and balance in order to function, right? There's certain things that need to happen to every living thing. We went into some of this last time. You know, we talked about the Ojai pixie and what it took for that to even come about, and that it contains the sun. That's something Thich Nhat Hanh, I used to like how he put it, my Vietnamese Buddhist friend, would talk about how, like, that orange or that Ojai pixie contains the sunlight, contains the water, contains the love of the farmers who grew it. Not just that it took that to create that, but that it somehow contains or embodies those things. And it's a better way of putting it, I think, because, like, what happens to sunlight? Sunlight is being absorbed by our body. It's being absorbed by the trees. So in a sense, it is that sunlight is inside, is part of the plants and animals that are exposed to it. And so it does contain those things. And it contains the soil. You know, the soil that the plant absorbs, or that is used to grow the plant, right? Let's not forget that plants don't come out of thin air. Conservation of mass teaches us that the mass of these plants had to come from some other source, which we know is the soil, and the water, and sunlight. You know, it's all contributing to that process. You know, we can't forget that. Where things come from. You know, it's not just there. There's a continuation of things. And to see that is intelligence. So, yeah. That's what it takes, and that's what that intelligence that arises through paying attention, not the accumulation of knowledge. I mean, knowledge can be accumulated, but that is not the intelligence that we're speaking of. Accumulation of knowledge is not intelligence. There is a certain kind of intelligence, but when we use the same word to mean both things, I think is when there's a bit of a problem. And I think that is the problem. The problem is the limitations of language. So why do we use the same word to refer to these two things? We say, like IQ, right, stands for intelligence quotient, and there's tests to measure that form of intelligence, which is a very limited form of intelligence, which I would say really only measures how well you perform on those tests, not how that translates into real life. And I've always felt that, like before I even understood other way of looking at intelligence, if you want to call it that, I always said it's so, even tests, like when you take tests in class, do they measure how much you've learned, or do they just measure how good you are at taking tests? I mean, tests are a certain structure and format and timed, and it's like it's testing your accumulation of knowledge or your ability to solve certain mathematical or reasoning problems in a very short period of time using knowledge that you've accumulated. Often requires knowledge, right? That if you don't have that knowledge, let's say you didn't speak English and it's an English test, well then you would fail that test. Not because of your inability to solve the problems, but because the language barrier prevented you from even understanding the problems. Which goes to show you can't solve a problem unless you understand the problem, starting with the language, which is limited. Even if you read the English language and you understand English, and the test is in English, you understand some part of the problem, but in a limited amount of time, the expectation being, how many of these can you solve within an hour? I was never very good at time tests. Those are the worst, that I ever, because I always felt like that was not a good measure of what I felt I knew or understood. That there's different ways of understanding. There's like solving a problem regardless of how long it takes. And I've considered myself a problem solver, even in the ordinary sense of the word. Engineering problems, mathematical problems, technical problems. But I've never considered myself a fast learner or a fast solver. I always take my time. I like to go into things more. Understand the problem more before jumping to a solution. Sometimes there's unique solutions to problems, or the solution of the problem, especially one that has not been encountered before. A new solution, right? To be creative. You have to be creative to solve difficult new problems. And those problems are only difficult because you don't understand the problem. That once you go into that problem deeply enough, you understand it better. And in the understanding of the problem, the solution emerges. We've talked about this, but this is more than just words. I've had a lot of problems where I was stuck, didn't know where to go, and I stepped back from the problem. Stop. When you're stuck, it just means your brain is going down a path, and it's not comprehensive enough in its understanding of the problem. It's reached a dead end because of the limitation of the brain and the mind to solve a problem when you're too focused on it. When you've taken a path, one path, right, and that path leads to a dead end. That does not mean there's not another path that leads to a solution, but you didn't find it because you were stuck on one path. And if you're stuck on one path, you think you know how to solve this problem. There's the problem. You think you know. You pursue it. You reach a point where you'd find that you found the solution, or at least to your satisfaction, you think you'd have, or you think you have not found the solution. If you haven't found the solution, then you try another path. Try another path. But if you just randomly pick paths and go down many different paths, it'd take you a long time to solve that problem, and you may not find the optimal solution anyways. So instead of sort of this path-driven approach to solving problems, I take a problem in and I understand the problem. I go into the problem. I let the problem tell me the solution rather than me trying to tell it the solution. let the problem speak to you. And it speaks to you when you watch it. Watch the problem, turn it over, observe the problem, you know. Don't rush to a conclusion, rush to an answer. The only way you can rush to an answer is through your past knowledge. You have to have accumulated knowledge, and then rushing to an answer means searching your past knowledge for the solution and trying to match something you know with the problem you're presented. So let's take the example of the quadratic equation in math. Everyone has learned the quadratic formula if you've gone to elementary school or wherever that, I don't know where that's taught, I guess elementary school, maybe high school, I don't know these days. And you have a formula that you can apply, that you've memorized, you were taught. It's stored inside your brain. You're handed a problem, a math problem. You recognize the form of that equation as being the quadratic equation and say, aha, I know that. I remember. Your memory comes into play and you recall that equation and apply that equation, apply the formula, very mechanical process at this point. And you get an answer. You may have to check real roots and imaginary roots, you know, and do some, but that's also part of the memorized procedure for using the formula. You know the number of solutions you get, and then you can check them to see which, you know, because you get multiple solutions and you need to find the real solution. So you often use like just practical considerations or physical knowledge or some constraint on the problem to select from the multiple possible solutions the one that is the solution, and then you're done. You write it down, you show your work, or points are deducted, and but showing your work essentially just means plugging, you know, information into a formula, following the steps in a very mechanical way, and getting the answer, and then writing that answer down. Done. And that's how people measure, say, your knowledge of mathematics. It's a very common thing, right? Accumulate knowledge, present tests to people that really is just testing your recall of that memorized knowledge, and then doing that in a very short amount of time as well. So you're under pressure, you know, to get an answer within an hour, 50 questions within an hour, whatever it is. And it just seems so limited. And I guess what always bothered me about that, and why I never liked tests like that, is it's just, you're like a machine, right? You're recording information, then you're replaying it, and the creativity is very minimal there. Like, you're not really doing anything new. You know, there's nothing new about that. It's the old, so it's just the testing of your knowledge of the past. But a lot of times, even the greatest mathematicians, like Gauss and all these guys, like, they came up with new methods, you know, and I think it was Gauss that was famous for developing as a child. I mean, maybe this is real, maybe this is a legend, that he was in a class and they asked him to add up all the numbers between 1 and 100, and all the other kids were busy just doing it the way they knew how from past knowledge. 1 plus 2, and then plus 3, and then plus 4, and they're just doing the math, cranking it out to get it done. And that was the expectation, I think, of the teacher. Gauss stepped back a bit and said, wait a second, if I list all the numbers in row, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 100, just list them all, and then underneath that row, do the opposite in reverse order. So under the 1, place 100. Under the 2, do a 99. And the 3, 98. And you continue that. So it's like a table with 2 rows and multiple columns, 100 columns for the 100 numbers, 1 through 100, and then 2 rows, one where it's 1 in the normal sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4 to 100, the other 199, the reverse sequence. Then you add those rows up, and you get 1 plus 100 is 101, 2 plus 99 is 101, 3 plus 98 is 101, and you get 100 101s. They all add up to the same. So in adding, so you've added it twice. You've added 1 to 100 in that process. You've also added 100 to 1, but that's the same sum. So you've added that number twice. So the answer is very simple. It's 101 times 100 is the sum of twice of what you want, because you summed the numbers 1 to 100 twice, because there were 2 rows of these numbers. So 100 times 101 divided by 2 is the answer. That's the sum of 1 to 100, and that is like the solution that Gauss supposedly came up with in his classroom. Finished it within a fraction of the time of what everyone else did, because he saw things differently. He stepped back a bit from the normal mechanical patterns, and some insight, right? We could say this is insight, sort of what we talked about before, that comes from some place. Where does it come from? It's hard to know. But what it's clear to see the effect of insight, which was that something new was seen, and by letting the problem speak to him, right? He saw the problem and it spoke to him in a way that just came to him, right? And it didn't come to him through a normal sequence of time, because it wasn't like he recalled the solution anywhere. It didn't exist. It was in his mind. He saw somehow the arrangement of these numbers in that way would lead to a solution. And he didn't do that, right? He didn't intentionally come up with that. It just appeared in his mind. We always like to think that we do things, right? That we're the doer behind these actions. And that, like, when a solution like that comes to your mind, you feel proud that somehow you did that. You figured it out. But you didn't really figure anything out. The brain, somehow, there was insight into the problem because of the nature of that brain or the universe surrounding that brain. The origin of insight is a bit of a mystery, or at least to the thinking mind. It is a bit of a mystery, because where did it come from? Where does insight come from? You know, it's a good question. But this is an example of limited insight, though, because it's not the insight of the entire workings of the universe, which also can happen, right? You can have insight into that. But this was insight into a little mathematical problem. Insight because it was a new approach that was not derived from previous approaches, and came out of apparently nowhere. But then once it was seen, there was no unseeing it. This is what I've said before about insight. What it led to is a new formula. So there's summation formulas now that exist that are that. You know, what's the sum of, you can represent the sum using sigma, and, you know, the summation notation and how it works. You know, there's notations for that in Greek letters and symbols, and you can represent that sum and then write a formula for that, which is the answer. And that's a summation formula that, like, everybody learns at some place in their educations. So now it becomes another form of knowledge that somebody else memorizes. That insight, that what started with insight ends with knowledge being, now it's stored. Now that that's known, it's known, right? And when something is known, it becomes a memory. So the origin of insight was new, but then it's known, which becomes the past, and becomes a new formula to memorize. Just like the quadratic formula was, somebody developed that at some point in time through insight of how to solve that problem, and then became a formula, which then becomes mechanical. So this lets us see kind of where insight ends and where mechanical thought begins. So mechanical thought picks up and takes the result from insight and then plays with it, stores it, manipulates it, to make it a mechanical thing. And in that sense, the insight's gone, right? The insight was there in a flash, and then the rest of it, knowledge took over and said, this is wonderful stuff, I'm going to store it in my memory banks for later, and you know, recall it when I need it. But like when you think of it, it's so interesting that the original insight, there's an energy to it that is not there when you just recall a formula. You know, the formula is not that exciting. It's useful, but not that exciting. But the insight, imagine the feeling that arose when he discovered that had that insight. It has energy with it, and it does have a certain joy. You know, there's a joy to the insight, that when one has insight like that, the joy that comes from realizing this is new, something new just happened that never happened before in the history of the universe, as far as you would know, and it will never happen again in that exact way. And that is new, and that is creation, and that is not from human thought. Not from human thought in the sense of recall of memory. That's not to say the brain, the energy of the brain doesn't have some part to play in it, but we have to sort of differentiate between what is thinking in the normal way, and then is there another way of the brain operating, right? We can even think of this as just like different modes the brain can have. One is thought in the conventional sense, which is a reaction to memory, right? That memory is stored in the brain, and then there's a reaction to that limited memory, but we say that is limited. That is only as good as the information it's provided, which is only as good as the knowledge, which is only as good as the memory that has been accumulated. A newborn baby has much less of that accumulated memory, so it does not have that knowledge. But the brain is working still in different ways. And so we can say, you know, we could say that insight is a different way of the brain operating, a different pattern that is not based on memory alone, anyways, and you know, provides you with something new in that moment that you didn't have before. All thinking is old from the past. It's just a regurgitation of what's been recorded. You know, normal thought is just recall of memory, and then reacting to that memory in some way to produce a new memory, and it's just recording, like a sequence of recordings that are occurring. Whereas insight doesn't work that way. It's not that mechanical process. And it's new, and it's also, it reveals truth. Right? There's like a truth in, like once you see that formula, once you understand that problem, even that little problem, there's a truth to it. You know why it works. You understand that it's true, and nobody can convince you that it's not true, no matter what they say. And it's like a one-way street. You know, whereas thinking by memory, it's like it's only as good as the memory you have stored, and if you didn't accumulate enough memory, you could be wrong, right? And if you can be wrong, it's not truth. And anything based on memory can be wrong, because memory is limited, incomplete, partial, not holistic. And there's this holistic knowledge that occurs, not holistic knowledge, holistic understanding that is not just based on memory. And, you know, it's not important that we say, well, is it a different function of the brain, or is it cosmic intelligence, or what's the source of it, right? Like that is the thinking brain trying to understand something it may not be able to understand. But it wants to attribute it, again, to just knowledge of the brain. So it wants to take insight and say, oh, it's nothing more than just the operation of the brain, and chalk it off again. Which also, you know, when it does that, you stop inquiring into it. Like, instead of trying to explain it away, like explain away insight, as an operation of the brain, and then I don't need to think about it anymore. Okay, it's just the brain doing something different, maybe slightly different than what thinking is, but nothing magical, nothing mystical, nothing that requires cosmic intelligence or any such thing, just the brain. And then you walk away from it, right? You stop inquiring about insight, when in fact, why stop? Why not say, insight is a very interesting thing, I want to go into it. I want to understand insight. I want to, I see something there that's new and interesting. So like when you hear a story like that about Gauss and how his insight, of course you think, oh, I want that. I want the ability to do that. But again, that's a want, it's a desire, which comes from our normal thought, that it would be useful to have that skill. Or imagine what I could do. Or I could get a better job. Or I could impress people with my intellect. Again, that's all ego-driven desires. So one can see insight, and then it just becomes turned into this carnal, ordinary, mundane thing that, like anything else, we want to use and abuse. Use it to our own advantage rather than marveling at insight and not wanting to possess it and have it and own it. And maybe it's not something that cannot be possessed and owned. And but that's the tendency we have, to own and possess things that we find appealing or attractive or whatever. We want to own it, have it. I want to have that shiny object in the window. I want to have that new car. I want to have insight because it'll feed my desire for more. So that's when it gets corrupted, right? Insight can be corrupted by thought the moment that it happens, because thought tries to capture it and make it something and explain it away in some other way. And what I would say is, I don't know where insight comes from. And see, when I say I don't know, no means knowledge, no means memory, no means there's nothing in my databanks, in my memory system, that can explain to me insight that doesn't require conjecture beyond my knowledge. It's beyond my knowledge to understand the origin of insight, right? And I think this is why it's okay to say I don't know, because what I don't know means is I have no memory of any explanation of insight that's satisfactory. And we talked about life being complex. Life is an amazingly complex thing that may have no explanation. There may be no simple explanation for insight, but the brain struggles for one. Whenever we see phenomena in the world, we struggle for an explanation because we want to know it, because we're scared by unknown things. We're scared by things we don't know because they could be dangerous to us. The unknown is scary, right? But why is the unknown scary? The unknown is only scary because you're projecting what you know onto the unknown. You know about things that are dangerous, and an unknown thing could be dangerous, could not be dangerous. You don't know. It's not clear, but because it's unknown, it could be anything, right? And that uncertainty is scary, so we want certainty. We want things to be certain, and so we seek simple explanations for things because we don't like complex things that we can't understand or that we can't explain. And what this is right, we're inquiring into we're inquiring into sort of this, what is thinking? What is insight? What is thinking? And we're not trying to explain it, right? We're saying let's observe it. Observe insight. See when it happens. Explore it, but also not just watch somebody else's insight, like Gauss, but also say, is that something that happens to me? Is it something that happens that I can observe, rather than being something that I observe the effects of in somebody else? So it's a natural question to say, do I have that insight? Does that insight occur to me? or just to other people? Are you just born a certain way, and then that insight is only there for certain people? Which, I mean, I think we would say that mathematical insight certainly seems to be attributable to certain types of people, right? The Gausses and the Maxwells and the whoever's, the famous mathematicians, have a proclivity for that sort of insight. So you would think that that type of insight, or that specialized mathematical insight, may only be available or readily available to certain people who have that inclination. So that insight may not be the greatest insight, right? It may not be the most accessible insight, but that doesn't mean that there isn't insight that's not accessible to everyone. That, or grander insights, right? Not insights that even relate to mathematical problems, but insights about living and life. But in a similar way, right? In that it's not something gained through past knowledge, it's not something that you learned in school that you're trying to apply, but insight that is gained by looking. You know, and I guess my best explanation for insight is that there is an order to the universe, that if you pay attention to that order, insight arises as the order itself. That the order is the solution. You know, that the solution is like the finding of order, right? To solve a problem in some sense is to find the orderly, there's an order to the solution, you know, that is there, that may be able to be seen. Because if you think of the problem presenting itself, any problem that presents itself to us, is only a problem because there's something about that problem that makes it a problem. Some element of that. You know, you may have, you know, a problem with mosquitoes, you know, biting you when you're walking on a trail. And it's a problem because, you know, they're pasty, they're annoying, they bite you and then your arm swells, and you know, it becomes a problem. So you try to find a solution to that problem. Well, how do I solve that problem? And there could be many ways in which thought can solve that problem. Well, you can smack the mosquitoes and kill them as they're on their skin. Sort of a solution. You can wear protective clothing so the mosquitoes can't reach your skin. It's another solution. You can put spray on you, you know, the different kinds of lotion and spray that are repellents for insects, which all have maybe side effects, benefits, you know, different characteristics that you may decide which one you like or want. You can even use a fan. You know, a fan is effective at, like, mosquitoes can't fly in wind, basically. Like, they have a limited ability to fly. So if you had a fan on you, it keeps the mosquitoes away, just to some extent. And so there's all these solutions that knowledge brings about, right, to solve that problem. But you also have to go into, why is it even a problem if mosquitoes bite me? And you could say, well, I experience pain. What if I ignore that? You know, what if the pain, I just let it happen and I don't worry about it? And is it a problem anymore if that pain isn't bothering you? Like, if they're not bothering you, then why is it a problem? It's only a problem because you've made it a problem. Or there's something about it that you don't like, but that's a feeling, you know, that's a reaction. So there's a negative reaction you want to get rid of, and it only becomes a problem because you want to get rid of that negative reaction. If it didn't disturb you in any way, it wouldn't even be a problem. Which also shows there are no inherent problems. Problems are perception. We perceive a problem based on something that we don't like or something we want. There's thought creates the problem. There is no inherent problem. Problem is not like a thing of nature. Why are there any problems? You know, there's events, there's circumstances, there's things that happen. You know, everything's happening. But does it mean the world is filled with problems and not problems? Like, is that a universal design? Or is that a construct we put on top of what's happening? Some things are problems, some things are not problems. is it possible to have no problems at all? Which if there's a psychological element to problems, which I think we're investigating here through inquiry, right? And again, this is inquiry. This is not me, I'm letting it come from examining what is a problem. Why is anything a problem? And then letting that problem tell me maybe there is no problem. I started with the assumption that there were problems. What if there is no problem? Why do we call something a problem? So you have to go into why do we call something a problem? Why do we consider it a problem? Then you go into that, right? And then there's more to it. It's like a flower that keeps blooming. But like with multiple layers, like a lotus that opens and opens, and there could be layers and layers, or like an onion with all these layers on it, and you're peeling away the layers to get at something more fundamental. So then you may say, well, maybe there is no problem. What is a problem? It's a word we use, and we think we have problems, and some people, I think you recognize, feel like they have more problems than others. This is sort of like anxiety, right? Like people that are very anxious are just filled with problems. They have problems, they're worrying about everything, right? That it's something in their nature to have more problems than other people. Do they really have more problems than other people? Or do they just see more problems or feel they have more problems? And that's not to downplay anxiety, but it's to look again at what is anxiety. What are those things that we may take medication for to try to solve? Is there another way of looking at that to see, is it even a problem at all? Why do I need to eliminate that? Why, if I just understood what it is, understand, say, anxiety. And is anxiety related to having problems? I think it is. Because I think, the way I see it, it's like when you're overwhelmed with problems, things that are happening, a problem is something undesirable, right? I think we can say that. If we go into it, what is a problem? A problem is something undesirable, but I would say more fundamental than that. A problem is something that's thrown at you. I think that's even the original definition of the word, is it's a challenge, right? A problem can be thought of as like a challenge. That's something that you have to solve, or not solve, something you have to deal with. Like if something's thrown at you, you have to react. You either let the ball, let's say it's a ball is thrown at you. You either do nothing and the ball hits you, or you put your arms out and grab the ball, or bump it away with your head, or in some way or another, you either react or you don't react to what is that thing that's thrown at you. What it means to be thrown at, even, what does that mean? Something that comes your way, something that's going to interact with you in some way. It's entered your sphere of influence, right? If there's a bubble around you, it's entered your bubble. For a physical problem anyways, it's something that's within the vicinity of you. It could be like if you're being rained on, the rain hitting you could be a problem because it's entering your space that you've created, by the way, around yourself. You've created this concept of space around yourself. And then anything that enters that space is a physical problem. You have to deal with it. It could be a person running at an angry person coming at you that wants to hurt you. And they enter your space, and now that's become a problem because something is coming at you. So I think the etymological origin of that word, or I've been told that, I haven't independently investigated that to see, but it makes sense to me that a problem can be thought of most fundamentally as something that is thrown at you or comes at you, maybe is a better way. Thrown requires a thrower, but maybe something that's coming at you that you need to do something about or not do something about. Maybe you don't need to do anything, but you think you need to do something about it, right? That's the nature of thought, is that and all things react to things that come at them, right? Plants, animals react. Animals, we know, if you approach an animal, they get scared and run away. Well, a feral animal, which I have feral cats that I take care of, that are getting more used to me now and come up to me, but like initially would run away. So I was a problem to them initially. They saw me as a threat, potential threat. And the reaction to a potential threat is run away. Put distance between yourself and that problem in the hope that that problem will just go away, not come back. So one solution to a problem is to run away. Another is to observe the thing that's happening and see, is it a threat or is it not a threat? Right? And by inquiring into it, you know, this is what happens, right, with feral cats. They, over time, they say, well, that thing that I ran away from gives me food, water. Maybe it's not a threat. Maybe it's actually a benefit. So the thing you initially thought was a problem and ran away from as your response to that problem, the more you went into it, the more you watched it, turned out to not be a problem. Or not what you thought it was, right? Because you just didn't have a complete understanding of the situation that was occurring. So it was a problem to you when you didn't understand it well enough. As you gain understanding by watching, right? And that occurs with a cat. They're not verbal, there's no words, right? Cats don't, they may have other ways of communicating that we don't understand, but they don't have language like we do. So this isn't a process of words, it's a process of watching. The cats watch, right? I mean, this is what cats do 90% of the time. They watch, they observe. I mean, you ever see a cat looking at a mouse? Or a cat watching a mouse hole, intently paying attention to that hole, waiting for something to come out of it, right? So that is its own learning, is to pay attention to its world. The cat pays attention to its world and reacts to the world in that way through its paying attention. And they do have memory, right? So there's some recording of experience, maybe not in language, but in some way, and that knowledge is there. But how they learn most of the time is by paying attention, right? And so we're learning about problems right now, right? We're learning about problems and we're inquiring into that. And it's interesting how the conversation ended or went this way, and definitely didn't think, but it's like, it definitely is like is a blooming thing where you don't know what it's going to bloom into. It's just blooming, and you follow it as it's blooming and just go into it. Don't direct it. Don't direct the path, but let it emerge, right? There's a difference between emergence and direction. And to emerge is to let something just be what it naturally wants to be, versus trying to make it be something that you want it to be. And things in nature emerge, right? Plants, animals, they become what it is in their nature to become. We can't make a tomato plant become an orange, no matter how much we try, right? There's no way. It doesn't happen, because the genetic structure, the conditions have led to that being what it is. And there's no way to make that be. And that's a great example, I think, of how there's emergence, which is the natural order of things, right? That tomato plant's going to become a tomato plant, and the orange is going to become an orange, and you know, a pear tree is going to produce pears. And that's the emergence of something that is outside of our control, that is a natural process, and that's the natural order that we spoke of earlier, right? There is just it's a force of nature that takes things in a certain direction based off of causality, right? So this is the world of causality, that there's many causes, too many for us to pin down, that causes an orange to become an orange and a tomato to become a tomato. I mean, we can say genetics, but it's much more than just that. It's the environment, it's the interaction of that with the environment. You know, you can say it's all in a seed, right? So there's a seed that contains the knowledge of a tomato plant or the knowledge of an orange or whatever it is, right? And that is true. That seed contains the essence of that. And that's also amazing, isn't it? That seeds grow into trees or plants. It's amazing, like a miracle of nature, right? And that is the intelligence of nature, the intelligence of, we call this cosmic intelligence. It's there when you plant a seed, and that seed grows into the plant that is intended to become. That's the intelligence of nature. The plants have intelligence inherently there, right? And it's not, everything has that, right? Everything, like we are like the seeds and have our own natural tendencies and inclinations based off of how our body has evolved. Our body and brain have evolved over thousands of years, millions of years. I mean, at one point, all life was likely one thing and split into all these different varieties over countless eons. But we're all connected. You know, all living things are connected, you know, in that way, that we all sprang from the same well, and just went different ways. But that source of the well is still there. You know, life energy, or you could say is the intelligence itself of the universe that allows things to become what they become. We see, you know, how we judge intelligence, right, is another thing. What is intelligence and what is order and all that? And like, you know, human intelligence is judged by taking a test, which is a very mundane way of doing it. But if you look around you to see the intelligence of nature, you see the variety of living things as just an amazing result of that intelligence. You can't see the intelligence itself, right? It's behind the scenes. It's not a tangible thing that you can just touch and feel. But when you look around and see the infinite variety of plants and animals and say, that is amazing, and that we are at this point, right? There's a beauty to that, right? So first you're in awe. You're in awe if you're really paying attention. You're in awe of what's around you, in awe of the miracle of nature, of living things, of plants and animals. And it starts there with just the observation of the multitude of living things and creatures and the earth itself and the amazing, you know, and maybe it never goes beyond that. Like, there's almost no reason to go beyond that, right? If you're paying attention to the amazing diversity of life, like, that is, why go even further than that, you know? But if you go further, from that you may surmise, right? Now this is thought though, right? So like, if you don't let thought enter into it, as I said, you just are observing nature. You're observing the universe. You're observing everything, living things, non-living things. And in that pure observation, there's nothing, like, you don't need to call it intelligence. You don't need to call it order. You don't need to give names to it, right? We want to name things. So even using names like intelligence and order and all that is detracting from the truth, the fundamental truth, which is just what's there. What's there is the truth. You don't need to explain it. We don't need to explain cosmology or come up with a theory for how and why things are the way they are. They are the way they are now. The truth is in that now, that observation of what is without explanations. Observe that. Pay attention to that, and don't break that attention. Don't let thought, when thought comes into play, that attention is broken by its very nature, which is why you can't pay attention if you're thinking. If you're thinking, you're not paying attention, because thoughts are this other process of the brain, the normal process, the normal. We've given such importance to thought, and you know, this could be a result of who knows why. Right, this evolution, or how we got to this point where thought has become, and knowledge have become, the dominant factor in our lives. Everything we do is based off of thought and knowledge almost. And I don't think it was always like that, but something happened in our course of evolution. It allowed us to survive, maybe, in one way. Now it's going to be the source of our destruction, which is the other side of it, right? But instead of seeing that, by observing, again, observe the order of things, observe the what's happening, and through that observation one can see that thought is now harming us as well as helping us. You know, not saying that thought is an evil thing, cast it away. It's to understand the place of thought, not as the dominant factor, but as one part of who we are. And that when you see the whole, you see that's not all we are. We're not just our thoughts. That's not just us. We're not, our body, physical body, is much more than just thoughts. There's so much more to it. And that body has an intelligence that isn't just the intelligence of the brain, of thoughts. Because thoughts are very specific, right? Thoughts are this reaction in the brain to memory, which is stored in the brain. When I say thinking, that's what I'm referring to. that memory recall, the reaction to memory, that's a small part of the brain. It's a small part of who we are. But we make it the dominant factor, and it guides our life. Think of how our life is driven by ideas. That we have ideologies, and we live by those ideologies, and we construct our life to fit within some constructed house of cards, house of ideas that we've built up or that was given to us, passed down to us through previous generations. We didn't invent that. It didn't come to us directly. It was passed down. So there's an inheritance of these ideas that is the history, the past, which is not now. What's happening now may have nothing to do with what happened in the past, but we construct ourselves so that we frame the present in terms of the past knowledge that we've accumulated through our ideologies, and that directs our actions, and that's how we live now in this thought-based, ideological-based society, which I would say is only getting more thought-based as social media takes over and as AI, because AI is another form of thinking. AI is mechanical thinking in a computer, very similar to how humans think, which also shows thinking is not a sacred thing. Thinking is a mechanical process that can be replicated by a machine fairly accurately, more so than probably even humans can. This is one thing AI is teaching us, right? That people before AI understood thousands of years ago that thinking is a mechanical process. It's not a sacred thing. And that anything sacred doesn't come from thought, but from some other place, from some other origins, from some not thought is all we can say, right? Not where it comes from, but not from thought, right? We can say what something isn't. Like, we may not be able to say the positive of what something is, but we can say what it isn't. And we can say that thought is a mechanical process because we can observe it. We can observe it in our own mind, but now we can recreate it. That's even more. See, to me, what we can learn from AI, instead of seeing AI as some evil thing, AI is, we have figured out through our cunning knowledge that this mechanical process that occurs in our brain that we have called thinking is mechanical and is a reaction to memory, which is stored knowledge, and that thought is the recall of that knowledge and the twisting and turning of that knowledge, regurgitation of that knowledge to not produce something new, but another way of just rearranging that past knowledge, right? I mean, answers, when you just take knowledge and you answer in terms of knowledge, you take the past and bring it into the present, and it carries into the future. Nothing's new there. The past leads you to the future. That past is limited, though. And just in the same way, AI requires training off of lots of data. It's only as good as the data that it's trained on. If you don't train AI on a lot of data, it doesn't produce great results. The results are very limited. You have more data, the results are less limited, but the point is it's always limited. The results of AI are always limited by the data set that it was trained with. There's no infinite data set. There's no infinite knowledge in that traditional way that allows AI to be some infinite thinking machine. One could think that, though, right? One could extrapolate that to say infinite knowledge would lead to infinite thought, but it can never happen through that incremental way. Perhaps that's true, but it doesn't happen incrementally. And all knowledge now happens incrementally. There's no way to access infinite knowledge in that way. There's no infinite memory bank. There's no infinite brain. But it brings up a good question. Is there a way of knowing everything? Is there a holistic understanding that is not incomplete, not based on thought? Because I think we recognize thought is limited. So you have to throw that out. And that applies to AI as well as to human thought. But just to get back to that, there are so many similarities. Anyone that uses AI, and I use it for my work, it's amazing how close AI is now. I would say not close, it does replicate and in certain cases surpass human thinking. I mean, I use Claude for my work, and it solves problems using this thought process faster than I can do it, better than I can do it, And I just have to admit that. And I think we don't want to admit that, right? We don't want to see that to be true, but it's true. And it's true because I observe it. I observe it to be true. I know the types of problems I've been able to solve in the past, and the speed at which I've been able to solve it, and the quality at which I've been able to do it, which always have been limited. We all have limitations. I may have been able to solve certain problems better, maybe, than other people, and in just a sense, you know, I've always had some natural ability for math and science, but again, always limited. No matter how good we think we are, we're not that good, right? We are all limited, including myself. Every human being is limited, and all of this is limited. And all I can say is, I'm seeing that AI, in certain cases, supersedes what I'm capable of doing. Now, there's other things it's not capable of doing. I think we're running out of time here. Let me cut this off so I don't lose anything. Okay, I'm going to start it up again and just see how far we can go to close this out. But I do think this is an important thing to finish, which is AI is teaching us something about thought. And we can learn from this, right? By observing, what is AI doing? What is this all about? Like, it's happening so fast, and what's happening? What's happening is we have technologically reached the point where human thought can be emulated. And I think some people will say that's not true. Some people will say it's true. I think it's pretty clear that it's a fact, that you can observe it through the action of AI. We can observe that it can produce results in many cases that are equivalent to, if not surpassing, what certainly the average human being can do. And I would say above average human being can even do. And all that's saying is we are on track to replicating human thought, and we have to be aware of that. And what does that mean, though? What does it tell us about thinking, right? And some people are afraid of that because they don't want to think that human thought is something that can be replicated. They want to think it's sacred because everything they know, they want to think that that is them, right? If I am my thoughts, right? If I am a bundle of memories, which I would say is a fact, that this idea of I and me comes from this idea of memory. Without memory, you would have no concept of being an individual. So I would say it all comes from memory. And then you're telling me that there's nothing special about that, that there's nothing sacred about that. All my ideas of religion come from my brain. All my ideas of philosophy come from my brain. All my knowledge, what I do for a living in work, comes from this brain through thinking. And you're telling me that can all be replaced by a machine. Then what I think I am may not be sacred anymore. That's what I think is the more important existential crisis that we're going through. I mean, it's not just data centers, which is a big problem, and the use of data. I think we can redesign data centers, though, to be more efficient, energy efficient. We're just not doing it now. People are being lazy. You can make data centers more efficient. Again, it's harmony. It's find a way that we can do this harmoniously, because I do think there's probably no going back with AI at this point, because it's just too useful. But if we don't use it right, just like everything else humans have done, we'll find a way to use it to destroy ourselves, just like everything else. But when done properly, it can be an amazing thing, because it can be a very powerful tool. But if improperly done, it will destroy us. But that's true of everything humans have ever done on this planet. And I would say our track record's not that great, so the odds are not that great that we're going to do this right, but there can be hope. Little squirrel here, attaching itself to the... Hey, buddy. So, the AI, what's it... So I guess the only point is, then what can transcend thought? What does it mean to be human that isn't just about thinking? Right? So it's not the end of the world to say thought can be replicated. What I think it says is, this may help us to put thought in its proper place, because we'll see thought as being the mundane, mechanical thing that it is, and then it forces you to ask bigger questions like, well, what is there besides thought then? What does it mean to be, does being a human being require me to, all my identity, who I think I am, is all thought-based? Or is there more to being human than thought-based? Is there something beyond thought? That's the natural extension. Go into that. This video will probably cut off in any second because I'm running low on battery. But this is the next point of inquiry. It's what we've been saying all along in all these videos. Seeing that so much comes from thought and going into all the aspects of ourself, of our nature, that originate from thought, that's come from thought, like fear, like desire, like these other things, and seeing that they are all just a product of thought. If they are all mechanical, they are all just similar to what AI is doing, and then it just requires you to step back and say, if you really understand that thought process, really understand the thought process occurring in your own brain, then something else may emerge, right? Maybe you'll see the order of things that leads to the mind and leads to the brain being in its current state. The disorder of our mind and brain is really just not the awareness of the thinking process. When you're aware of the thinking process and aware of the nature and structure of thought in its entirety, not part by part by part, bit by bit, but completely and wholly observing the thinking process in your own mind, then you see it for what it is, not this sacred thing, but a mechanical process, and you can move on. Right? There's a moving on, like an awareness of something else that is not thought, and the order of the universe, we can call it, or just whatever. Don't have to call it anything. Just observe. We're touching around the periphery of it with everything we're saying, but you can't talk about what cannot be expressed in words. What is ineffable cannot be expressed in any number of words. So then there's a natural, is there anything ineffable? Is there a thing? Of course there is. I mean, it's obvious if you see it, which is an insight. If you don't have that insight, you won't see it. And I think it's either you see it or you don't see it. There's no in between. So see it. And just open your eyes to see it. See what you are, what you think you are. Observe who you think you are. Just go into that, who you think you are. Your memories, the nature of you, your physical, mental, psychological form. Nobody needs to tell you this. And there's no way for me to tell you this. And I'm not saying I have no knowledge that can be passed on. It's just seeing that has to be seen. And to see does not require knowledge. There's no way to pass that seeing on. I can't see through your eyes. You have to see through your own eyes. That's why none of this can be taught. It's just the only thing we can do is have dialogue about it to the point where one opens their own eyes. And that's it. And then there's no cause, that just has to happen. Right? And that's insight. And it happens, and I can't explain it, and you can't explain it, but we can talk a little bit about it and its effects. That's about all we can do. But it's just maybe in some way just to say, but it is possible to see it. It is possible to see holistically. That's maybe the only thing. But even if it's not, do the impossible. Why do we only limit ourselves to what's possible? Which again is determined by thought. Thought determines what's possible and what's impossible. If there's no thought, then the impossible becomes possible. All right, a good place to stop. Not get lost in our world of thoughts, which I think we have done in some way, by talking so much. But it's fun. I mean, this is fun, right? This isn't just about, there's no purpose to this. This is just the process of life unfolding, mentally as well as physically. And what I'm doing is even just part of that, and doesn't mean anything beyond the words themselves. So just have a good day, and until next time.